From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Monday, October 7. Commemorations today mark the one-year anniversary of a terrorist attack on Israel that launched a new phase of conflict and set the Middle East on the brink of wider war. Anthony Albanese's government has shifted its language on Israel's right to defend itself, condemning anti-Semitism and declaring Israel has a right to defend itself by responding to missile attacks on its soil. Today, a special episode of The Front with our correspondent on the ground in Israel, Yoni Bashan. "16 years ago, a little boy named Tal Grushka appeared on Israel's Channel 12 TV station, talking proudly about his upcoming performance in a major piano competition.
Shalom Oded.
מה שלומך, טל?
By 2018, that little boy was 20 years old, a tall, muscular young soldier, still in love with the piano. He posted a video on YouTube where he had 14 subscribers of himself playing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata Part 3. In the video, Tal Grushka is wearing ripped denim shorts and a t-shirt, sitting at an upright piano. He's concentrating hard, playing on through a few tiny mistakes. He's not looking at any sheet music. He's learned this piece by heart. And a year ago today, Tal Grushka was a 25-year-old major with the Israeli Army's Nahal Brigade, 931st Battalion, based in the West Bank, just south of Bethlehem. Early in the morning, they were called to respond to a major terrorist attack unfolding to the south. Hamas fighters flooding over the border from Gaza into rural villages including Kfar Azar. Grushka and his men were racing to Kfar Azar to defend the civilians from what would be one of the day's worst massacres. But Grushka never made it. Their convoy was ambushed by Hamas fighters a few hundred metres from Kfar Azar. And when Grushka opened the door of his armoured vehicle, he was shot dead.
Stunning developments in Israel as Palestinian militants fired thousands of rockets.
Hamas today launched a major surprise attack on Israel by air,
An I-24
land
News
and sea.
reporter quoted an IDF commander who mentioned the discovery of approximately 40 babies who had been subjected to horrifying violence, some beheaded,
You see
some
the babies, the mother, the fathers in the bedrooms, in the protection rooms, and how the terrorists kill them. It's not a war. It's not a battlefield.
And on October 10, as Israel reeled from the 1,200 deaths and hundreds of hostages taken in the attacks, Tal Grushka was buried.
It's a military cemetery in an area called Kfar Saba, and it was quite late at night and packed with people. This was 3 days after October 7, at a time when Israel was overrun with burials.
Yoni Bashan is the Australian's journalist, and he'd scrambled to get to Israel. Just hours after landing in Tel Aviv, Yoni found himself among the mourners at Tal Grushka's funeral.
There was actually 4 soldiers buried that evening. Tal was the first, and his funeral was held at approximately 10 p.m. inside that cemetery because similar services were just taking place all over the country and at all hours. So I just got off the plane, I'd just put my bags down, and I had never attended a military funeral in Israel before, but I found myself standing at this event with Tal's family, who I knew through my own family, but I'd actually never met them before, and so there was an extra layer of poignancy.
Yoni has been back and forth to Israel over the past year. And today in The Australian, we're publishing his interview with Tal Grushka's family.
The impression I got listening to Tal's family was that he was a lovely guy, still very much the 10-year-old kid who loved the piano, and he was actually a piano prodigy at a young age, but that he'd grown into this strong, fearless soldier who just believed in the mission of being a soldier. What was clear to me was that he wasn't in the army and pursuing a career in the army for the sake of carrying a gun and wearing a uniform, which in this country, there is a lot of cachet that comes with that. But for Tal, doing these things was a matter of security and safety for the Jewish people. And I know this not just because his family told me, but because I've read some of his writings and some of his poetry, which he posted online and which his family had given to me. But one of the other legacies of Tal as a commander was that he was very insistent with his troops that every Friday, just before the Shabbat weekend, they take out their mobile phones and call their grandparents. And this is partly because he had his own very strong connection with his own grandparents. And possibly the saddest sight I could have seen at his funeral was his grandfather standing there at the microphone and saying goodbye to him too. The legacy out of this is that this initiative of Tal's has become something of a movement in Israel, not just on social media, but fridge magnets have been printed, and there's a partnership with one of the telephone companies, and a university here has been promoting what Tal was doing with his soldiers. So there's this message that's going out there every Friday, call your grandmother. Even among the people I've encountered on this reporting trip to Israel, I hear about young people making more of an effort to call their elderly relatives. So it's undoubtedly having some sort of impact.
In Israel, as in many societies where military service is a part of life, there's a thread in popular culture of the thoughtful warrior poet who dreams of better times. But I'm a soldier and don't you cry for me, girl, goes the chorus of this 1979 hit by one of Israel's biggest stars, Shlomo Artzi. Israel has been, by choice and by circumstance, a warrior state since it was founded in 1948. After centuries of persecution, and after 6 million Jews were murdered in Adolf Hitler's Holocaust, the United Nations split a tiny sliver on the eastern shore of the Mediterranean roughly in half and called one slice Palestine and the other slice Israel, an acknowledgement that Jews and Muslims both regard this as their holy land. The idea was to give Jews somewhere safe to live forevermore, but the fighting has gone on ever since. October 7, 2023 was just the latest iteration. Hamas fighters swarming into Israel from Gaza and Israel pounding Gaza with a stated aim of returning the hostages, eliminating Hamas and destroying the tunnels under the Strip. Hamas, which began as an elected government but which morphed into a totalitarian regime, hasn't allowed Gazans a free vote since 2006. It brought on this conflict with an intention of galvanising the world against Israel, and paying the price have been Gaza's civilians, with Hamas claiming 40,000 have died in this year of bloodshed. And in Israel, a sense of complacency and tranquility, particularly for the post-Holocaust generations, have been completely shattered. Israel has quite a remarkable missile defence system called the Iron Dome, which has protected it in a lot of instances from rocket fire coming in from over its borders. But October 7 really shattered their sense of safety and their sense of faith in the Israeli state to protect them, didn't it?
Yeah, and one of the drawbacks of having an Iron Dome system is that in Israel's case, it didn't have as much of an urgency to take care of the rockets being fired from Hamas in Gaza for many, many years because it had the safety of the Iron Dome system. So as long as it was working and as long as missiles weren't landing in Israeli population centres, there was no great need from the Israeli army to mount any kind of incursion into Gaza, or what Israelis sometimes call a grass-cutting mission, where you go in and mow the lawn to get rid of the problem and wait until it grows back. But because of that circumstance, you've got a situation on October 7 where hundreds, even thousands of Hamas fighters and even ordinary Gazans have stormed across the border, infiltrated Israel. And what happened was Israel's military was left flat-footed by what happened. It was caught off guard. So I guess we're left in a situation where even now, 1 year on, there's approximately 101 Israeli hostages still being held in Gaza. And so the compact between the state and the people, in which a person gives 3 years of their life to military conscription and in return they're assured of that safety and security, the image of that, or the symbolism of that, seems to have been fractured in part because Israelis are looking at Gaza and seeing their countrymen still held in captivity. And while the army is doing whatever it can to try and get them out, they are being hamstrung. They haven't been returned. And so that has had a devastating impact on faith in the army and faith in the security establishment. Although it's not totally broken, there are certainly some people who are asking themselves what it's all for at this point.
Coming up after the break, how Tal Grushka's generation, both in Israel and in countries like Australia, is responding to this conflict in real time. The Australian subscribers have been reading the best analysis of this huge story ever since October 7 last year. Join us at theaustralian.com.au, and we'll be back after the break. It's young people who are having to fight this war on Israel's behalf, and yet they are people for whom the Holocaust and the pogroms of history are just that, they're history lessons. So how does this generation, who's grown up under the Iron Dome, grown up with a sense of Israel being a safe place, square this conflict that they now find themselves in, this existential fight?
This is a situation that Jews the world over may not have had to contend with because they grew up in a post-Holocaust generation where Israel's existence was always secured. In Israel, however, there have been ongoing wars and ongoing skirmishes. And when you're a young person growing up here, you see your friends being drafted. You see your older siblings enlisting in the army and being sent at times into volatile and hostile parts of the region. And this war, or these wars, first in Gaza and now in Lebanon, don't appear to be all that different. And what I'm certainly seeing from the young people is that no one is reflecting on the events of October 7 and asking themselves what this is all for. Actually, they're heading in quite the opposite direction. They've been galvanised by what's occurred on October 7. They see the impending threat of doom that's bearing down upon them, especially now from the world's largest non-state military actor in Hezbollah. And they're very much energised to defeat this threat and do the work that's required of them.
Yoni, we've seen big protests on the streets of Sydney and Melbourne on Sunday. There are increasing reports over the year of anti-Semitism and of Jewish people who once might have had mixed feelings about Israel or who might have deplored Israel's military actions against its neighbours, but who now have different feelings. They've got a different sense of why Israel exists and what it means for the Jewish diaspora all over the world. And then we've got Tal Grushka's generation here in places like Australia who are, in large part, extremely concerned about Israel's actions in Gaza, and many of whom believe that Israel has gone too far. How is that perceived in Israel, the sense that in the West, Israel is being judged very harshly?
I think within Israel there's a great deal of confusion about how it's being perceived in Western capitals and elsewhere. Because in Israel, they see what they're doing in Gaza as removing the threat of terrorism. I mean, for the people here, it's very simple. There's a famous video of a young hostage named Naama Levy who's being driven in a ute to Gaza. Her pants have been soiled. She's being grabbed by the hair by a Hamas terrorist. Her Achilles heel appears to have been cut, so she can't run away. You've got an image of this beautiful young woman being dragged into Gaza, and you've got an Islamic jihadist dragging her by the hair to go along with him. I mean, this is a very simple fight for the people of Israel. I mean, they're asking people in the Western capitals, whose side are you on? Are you with the girl or are you with the guy dragging her by the hair? That is the very simple equation here. It's a fight against Islamic jihadism. It's a fight against terrorism, whether it's happening in Gaza or whether it's happening in southern Lebanon with Hezbollah, or whether it's coming via a long-range threat from Iran or from the Houthi rebels in Yemen or from the other fronts in Iraq and Syria. So that's the confusion here. Israelis feel like they're doing the work of the West to combat a threat that they would face too. And it's for that reason that they can't really understand why there are very high numbers of protesters gathering in Sydney and Melbourne and elsewhere, demanding that Israel call on an immediate ceasefire, stop the war, stop the fight, and allow this problem in the Middle East to proliferate.
Yoni Bashan is in Israel for The Australian. He'll be reporting live from the ground with our journalist Liam Mendez on commemorations and the very real threat of ground war on the border with Lebanon. Join us at theaustralian.com.au.